Ita for leaving my Bumble date stranded at a restaurant after she admitted she was going to her guy best friend's place after the date. A few months ago, I matched with Grace on Bumble. From the start, I felt a genuine connection with her. She had this warmth and a natural sense of humor that made our conversations flow effortlessly. We spent hours chatting on FaceTime, laughing and getting to know each other, and I could tell there was a real spark between us. She seemed so easy to talk to, and every conversation left me looking forward to the next. We finally arranged our first dinner date last week. I wanted it to be special, so I picked a really nice restaurant, even though it was a bit far from where we both lived. I was excited about it because I thought Grace was someone truly unique, and I wanted to show her that. Before the date, Grace asked if I could pick her up, and I had no issue with that. She mentioned that after the dinner she'd need me to drop her off at her best friend's place. I thought it was a bit unusual, but didn't mind. She explained she was having a movie night with her best friend, and I figured that was fine. When I arrived to pick Grace up, she looked stunning, and the drive to the restaurant was filled with light-hearted conversation. The date itself exceeded my expectations. We clicked in person just as well as we had online. We laughed, shared stories, and had a great time. Grace had a couple of drinks, but since I was the designated driver, I kept it sober. However, as the night came to a close, things took an unexpected turn. Grace asked if I could drop her off at James's place. At first, I was taken aback. I wasn't sure why she didn't just head home after such a great evening. Then, it clicked. James was her guy best friend. I hadn't known about him until then, and honestly, the way she phrased it made me feel a bit uncomfortable. Grace immediately noticed the awkwardness in the air. She apologized, but I assured her it was no big deal. I wasn't angry, but my mind started racing, and I couldn't help but feel confused. I asked her more about James, and she told me they were very close friends and often hung out, sometimes having movie nights together. Grace then took a deep breath and said something that really caught me off guard. She admitted that during these movie nights they sometimes made out, but assured me that nothing ever went further than that. She explained she wanted to be honest with me because she really liked me and saw a future with me. Her honesty was something I appreciated, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something didn't sit right. I wasn't sure why, but it felt like a gut punch. I tried to process it in my head. Was I just being too sensitive? Or was this something I could truly accept? In that moment, I felt conflicted. I told Grace that maybe she should just ask James to pick her up, and that I was going to leave. I paid for my portion of the meal, which was awkward, and walked out. Grace seemed really disappointed and sad, and it hurt to see her like that. Later, I found myself wrestling with guilt. I called my sister, hoping she could offer some clarity. She listened patiently and then told me that I probably shouldn't have just left Grace there. She said I could have handled the situation with more empathy, especially since Grace had been so sweet and honest with me. I explained to my sister how it felt strange to take Grace to a fancy dinner and then drop her off at her guy best friend's house, knowing they had this history. The thought of her potentially going back to James and continuing their closeness made me uncomfortable. I told my sister that I still had enough self-respect not to put myself in a situation like that. My sister gently reminded me that just because I didn't like certain aspects of Grace's friendship with James, it didn't mean I should abandon her outright. Still, I couldn't shake my feelings. I wondered, was I wrong? Was I being unreasonable?
Update 1.
Hey everyone, just wanted to provide a quick update on what's been going on. First, I want to thank everyone for their thoughtful comments and opinions on my previous post. It means a lot to me to hear different perspectives, and it's made me reflect a lot more on the situation. In hindsight, I can see why many of you thought I was in the wrong, and honestly, I agree. The reason I originally posted about this was because I felt guilty about how I handled things with Grace, and after reading your comments, I can see now that my actions weren't ideal. I've always trusted my sister's judgment. She's given me great advice throughout my life, and I think her perspective on this situation was spot on as well. When I told her about what happened with Grace, she didn't exactly say I was wrong, but she did say I could have approached it differently, and that leaving Grace stranded at the restaurant was probably a decision made out of frustration rather than clarity. Looking back, I see she was right. After I walked out on Grace last week, I didn't really know what to expect. I figured that would be the end of it, and part of me was even relieved that I could just move on. But Grace reached out to me a couple of times through text, and I won't lie, at first I just ignored them. I felt awkward about what happened, and part of me was still processing my feelings. But a couple of hours ago, I finally worked up the courage to open her messages. I was surprised, to say the least. Instead of coming at me angrily or blaming me for anything, Grace simply apologized again. She was kind, understanding even. And then, she told me something that made my stomach drop a little. She said that if it meant we could continue our relationship, she was willing to stop seeing James. She explained that after the dinner, she didn't go to James's place like she initially planned, but had taken an Uber home instead. I didn't expect that. I didn't expect her to apologize again or to even express willingness to change her relationship with James for me. It caught me off guard, but I also felt something inside me stir. Confusion, maybe regret, or even a little guilt. I responded to her text, telling her there was no need to apologize. I shouldn't have just left her hanging at the restaurant, and I definitely should have paid for her meal since I was the one who invited her to a pricey place in the first place. In retrospect, it was a huge oversight on my part, and I felt bad for leaving her with that uncomfortable situation. I asked her for her Venmo so I could reimburse her, but she refused. She said she didn't care about the money at all. Instead, she asked if we could continue seeing each other and giving our relationship another shot. But here's the thing. Even though I was touched by her honesty and the fact that she cared enough to try to make things work, I couldn't shake this feeling that we weren't right for each other anymore. My feelings for Grace just didn't feel the same as they did before. Something had shifted inside me. Maybe it was the fact that her openness about her friendship with James made me feel unsettled, or maybe it was the realization that I wasn't as ready for a serious commitment as I initially thought. Whatever it was, I knew that continuing the relationship wouldn't be fair to either of us. So, I texted Grace back and told her exactly how I felt. I said that I didn't think we were compatible and that I didn't want to continue things. It wasn't easy to say, and I knew it would hurt her, but it felt like the right thing to do. We ended up talking a little more after that, and I could tell Grace was disappointed, though she was very respectful of my decision. She admitted that she was sad, and I could feel the weight of that sadness through her words. I felt bad for her, of course, but I also knew deep down that it wasn't fair to either of us to keep going down a path that didn't feel right. That was the last text exchange we had, and although it wasn't easy, I think it was the best thing for both of us. It was tough to let go, but sometimes it's better to step back and recognize when something isn't meant to be. I've learned a lot from this experience, and I know now that I need to trust my gut, communicate more openly, and avoid acting impulsively in the future. I really appreciate all the feedback and support from everyone. Your thoughts have helped me process everything, and I feel like I've learned a lot about myself and how to handle difficult situations. Thank you for being part of this journey with me. Update 2. 1 month after I ended my relationship with Grace, I never expected that our encounter would happen so unexpectedly. After we broke up, I returned to my routine, throwing myself into work and personal hobbies, but I couldn't deny that I still thought about her. Although I had decided that the relationship wasn't right and that it was better to end it, a small part of me still felt regret for what we had once shared. One afternoon, while I was sitting in a small cafe I often frequent, I suddenly spotted Grace standing by the door. She saw me immediately, and I could see the surprise in her eyes. Grace smiled gently and walked over to my table, her eyes a little red but still acting naturally. "Hi, can I sit with you?" she asked. "Of course! Have a seat," I replied, feeling a bit awkward but also unable to deny that I was happy to see her again. Grace sat down, and we quietly stared at each other for a moment. She started to speak, and I realized that she no longer had that shy or sad demeanor she had before. She shared that after our breakup, she had spent time reflecting on herself and what had happened. She admitted that, in our relationship, she hadn't truly taken the time to understand and respect my feelings. Grace also acknowledged that she had placed too much importance on her friendships and neglected what was really important between us.
"I get it now. I've had time to think, and I realize what I need to do to grow. Things aren't always as simple as I thought, and I was wrong to let it all slip away,"
Grace said, her voice soft but full of sincerity. I looked at her for a long moment, sensing a clear change in her words and the way she viewed the situation. The regret I once felt slowly transformed into empathy, a newfound understanding. In fact, I had changed too. I realized that I still held some fondness for her, but not in the way I had imagined before. Grace wasn't perfect, but she had matured, and so had I. You're right, Grace. Everyone can change, and what's important is to recognize our mistakes and learn from them, I said, surprised at the emotions I was feeling. I can't deny that there are times I feel regret, but if we can learn and grow from our mistakes, then that's the most valuable thing. Grace smiled, her eyes lighting up. So, do you think we could give it another try? I was silent for a moment, thinking about her question. My heart no longer felt heavy like before. Instead, it was filled with a sense of lightness, freedom. I had taken time to learn about myself and what I truly wanted in a relationship. I wasn't sure about everything, but I knew that if we were to try again, it would be a relationship built on mutual respect and sincerity. I'm not sure about the future, but I think we can try starting from scratch. We can be friends first, and if things develop naturally, that would be great, I answered, looking directly into her eyes with sincerity. Grace nodded, a gentle smile returning to her face. You know, I think we can do it. It's never too late. We sat there together, chatting about the small things in life. While we didn't know what the future would hold, one thing was certain. We had met again, no longer with awkwardness or anger, but with deeper understanding and respect for one another. And this time, I felt as though we were heading in the right direction, not because of perfection, but because of sincerity and the positive changes within each of us. Update 3. A week after my reunion with Grace, I began to feel that things between us were gradually stabilizing. We had started dating again, but this time without rushing, without unrealistic expectations. Everything was progressing slowly, and I felt relieved because both of us had learned valuable lessons from our past mistakes. However, things weren't as simple as I thought. One afternoon, I happened to run into Grace and James at a cafe. At first, I didn't recognize them immediately, since I just glanced at them from afar. But then I saw Grace sitting there, talking to a guy, and their gestures made me feel like something was off. They were laughing and chatting naturally, but sometimes I caught James looking at her for longer than was appropriate, in a way that felt somewhat intimate. I entered the cafe, unable to shake the strange feeling in my chest. As I walked closer, I overheard something James said that made me stop. You know, Grace, do you think we could try again like we did before? It feels like we could go back to those happy days. I'm sure you still feel that way, don't you? In that moment, I could see the surprise and confusion on Grace's face. She stared at James for a moment, then gently shook her head. I couldn't hear the exact words, but I could feel the tension in the air. Just then, Grace turned around and saw me. She immediately stood up, her eyes filled with worry.
What are you doing here?
She asked, her voice shaking slightly. James, still unaware of my presence, kept laughing with a smile that didn't seem entirely genuine.
Oh, my friend, didn't you see? We're just having a chat. There's nothing to worry about,
he said, trying to sound casual. I looked at James for a moment, then turned to Grace. I could clearly see in her eyes that she didn't want to be in this situation. She didn't like James's persistence, and she was trying to dismiss those feelings. Grace turned to James, her voice calm but firm. James, I've told you before, I've made my decision, and you need to respect that. We've moved on from that time, and I can't keep going like this. I've made my choices, and I don't need to go back to you anymore, she said, her gaze resolute, no trace of hesitation left. James's smile faded. He looked at her angrily, as if he couldn't accept being rejected so decisively. What? Are you sure? He asked, his voice full of frustration. Grace stood tall, her eyes never leaving James. Yes, I'm sure. I don't want to continue with you, James. Thank you for the memories, but I can't go back, she said, then turned to me with an apologetic look, as if she were sorry for putting me in this situation. I couldn't help but feel a pang in my heart seeing Grace confront James like that. She had to turn down a close friend to move forward with a new relationship, and while I knew it was the right thing to do, I also knew it wasn't easy for her. James stared at us for a while, then sighed, turning and walking away without another word. Grace stood still for a moment, then turned back to me. She gave me a faint smile. "Do you mind?" she asked, her voice filled with worry.
I stepped closer and took her hand. "You did the right thing. I'm proud of you for being so strong," I said, my voice calm but full of empathy.
Grace smiled, but I could see a hint of weariness in her eyes. "Thank you. I know I did the right thing, but sometimes it's hard. Sometimes I wonder if I should just go back to what was easier. But then I realize I deserve a real relationship, and that's why I want to be with you," she said, her gaze warm as she looked at me. We sat down together, not needing to say much. Everything seemed clear now. Grace had let go of the past, and so had I. Now, we only needed to look forward, to a future that we could build together, no longer torn by the past. Update 4. Time passed, and the relationship between Grace and me gradually became stronger. The worries and doubts were replaced by trust and deep understanding. We had faced challenges together, from tense moments to openly sharing our true thoughts and feelings. Grace, with her determination and resolve, had chosen me, not because I was the easy option, but because she believed that we could build a better future together. As for me, I had realized that sometimes letting go of old relationships and habits is necessary to open the door to a new love, a new opportunity. We had romantic evenings, fun outings, and deep conversations. Every moment together, I felt the bond and respect we had for each other. Grace no longer felt anxious or needed to explain her past, and I no longer feared that one day she might go back to James or anyone else. A month after that event, Grace and I decided to take a short trip. We chose a quiet place with beautiful beaches and majestic mountains. Throughout the trip, we had wonderful moments, from watching the sunset together on the beach to early mornings when just the two of us would walk along the shoreline, sharing thoughts about life and the future. Every moment brought me a sense of peace and happiness I had never experienced before. One evening, as we sat together under the warm lights of a seaside cafe, Grace smiled gently and said, I was really scared when I started over, but now I feel truly happy. Thank you for not giving up on me." I took her hand, looked into her eyes, and said, "Thank you for trusting me. We will always have each other, facing every challenge life brings." We didn't need to say anything more. Everything was clear in our eyes and in the emotions we shared. This relationship wasn't just a rekindling, but a new step forward. A bright, new beginning that we built together with sincerity, respect, and love. And then, as the sunset slowly faded, we sat together, not needing to worry about the past, just focusing on the present and the future, where we would always be by each other's side, no matter what challenges or hardships might come our way.